Well, hello, sports fans. This is Larry Eater in San Jose, California. Stuart Weir in Oxford, England, the intellectual capital of the world, not a intellectual capital, but just so John Ridge knows, the intellectual capital of the world. Stuart, it's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Athletics Chat 73, and we have a very British focus today because at the end of last week, CEO Joe Coates and Performance Director Sarah Simmington resigned. And
Yes.
you take it from there, and I'll add in some thoughtful BOMOs.
Well, let me just remind everyone that from 2007 to 2017, we had a period of great stability. Ed Warner was chairman, and he was a very popular chairman, and Neil DeVos was chief executive, working with him. And then when Ed Warner came to the end of the length of time he was allowed to stay in post, and Neil DeVos decided he wanted to move on as well, we thought naively that it would be quite an easy to replace. But then Richard Barker came in from soccer, really. I liked him, but he lost the confidence of the board and resigned. Sarah Rao was an interim chair. Chris Clark came in, decided it required more time than he could give, and he went. Nick Coward, who had been the acting CEO, came in as acting chairman. And then we have now finally appointed Ian Beattie that I have written about. And he is a man who is from the sport, who runs cross country, who organizes races, has done loads of marathons, and is the CEO of a law firm which turns over, I believe, something like $30 million. So he's no fool. And I think that's good. But then after DeVos left, Nigel Hall was interim CEO, but then he was basically told he wasn't going to get the job and he left. Then Sarah Hyde Peters, former head of British Triathlon, was brought in, and I actually met her, but she lasted about 2 days when something then emerged that her husband had been banned from coaching because of an inappropriate contact with teenage girls, but that he was continuing to do some coaching at the club which Zara was president of. And so it was decided mutually that it would be best if she did not continue with her move into the CEO. And so Nick Card came in to be acting CEO, and then Joe Coates was appointed in March last year. Again, somebody who had been CEO of netball, which is a sort of a girls' game like basketball. And she came in saying that it really was an advantage that she wasn't from the sport because she would be able to see things more clearly without an emotional attachment. But Kath Mary wrote something brilliantly today. She said, netball is a game of 6 girls playing against 6 girls on a court. Track and field is indoor, outdoor, sprints, long distance, throwing, jumping, cross country, road races, and you cannot come in with a simple model for such a complex sport. So anyway, that's the background. It was rather ironic because last Monday I was on a briefing with Sarah Simmington, where she used the phrase, "Our focus is now going through to Paris." And 2 days later, there was a board meeting which was chaired by Ian Beattie the first time. And again, I am told by those who were there that Sarah again presented plans for the next 3 years. And then on Thursday at 7:15, an email hit my desk saying, British Athletics can confirm that Joe Coates and Sarah Symington have resigned from their posts.
Did you have
Just
any
like that.
idea? Any idea?
None at all. None at all.
I'm going to ask you another question. Having been involved in corporate America, and I was president and reported to a board of a large company, I know that most people who resign at that level are either pushed out or see that they've got a lack of confidence. Did Ian Beattie in his first meeting, do you believe that he made it very clear that he had no confidence in them?
Well, taking them separately, within 15 minutes of the email saying that Sarah Symington had resigned, she was tweeting that she had been appointed by British Cycling as their performance director.
Wow. So she had a job already. Huh?
She had a job set up. And she also tweeted, "I couldn't be happier," which did not go down well with people. You know, that loads of athletes were tweeting, you know, "You just screwed up my future," and you're tweeting, "I couldn't be happier." But why Joe Coates left is something of a mystery, and anything I say is purely speculation. Whether she felt that, I mean, Sarah is a close friend of hers, and that was part of the scenario that some people had reservations about. That if you bring in somebody who is a close friend to work under you, does that actually work? And is that a good appointment? But did she think, I'm not very popular at the moment, and without Sarah there, it's going to be more difficult? Did she feel, having encountered the first chairman at the board, that he is not a person she was going to enjoy working with? Did she have something else lined up? Nothing has come out to suggest that. And I don't know anything about her personal circumstances, but the post that she left carried a salary in the region of $300,000. So quite a post to give up. But I don't know. The thing that I would have to say, that the reaction I would say has been dismay that we're back in a situation of having no senior staff, but equally, I don't think that any great sadness that the two of them have left.
Okay.
Because the kind of comment you read in social media is that neither of them really ever quite got the sport.
Mm-hmm. How do you assess the work of Joe Coates?
I mean, she is a clever lady,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, she was certainly not all bad.
Yeah.
When I spoke to her in May of last year, I asked her, what are your strengths? And this is exactly what she said. I have a good strategic brain. I can look at an organization or a business and know where it needs to go and strategically guide it to that place. It's an advantage not being in the sport, because I'm able to go in there with a fresh pair of eyes and make tough decisions because I don't have the emotional connection. The problem with that is, did she actually understand where the sport needed to get to? I mean, the things that I think she did badly were dispensing with excellent staff. I mean, Terry Alexander was this week inducted into the English Athletics Hall of Fame. He is a vice president of European athletics, but there's no job for British athletics. Why? Similarly, someone like Stephen Maguire, who contributed brilliantly, left because he didn't feel he could work in the new arrangements. We've said this several times before, that British athletics had arguably had the best media team in the world, and she got rid of most of those. And she appointed as her key person a friend. And now, you see, her first two appointments were a woman and a black person. And that is great for diversity. And there certainly are not enough black people involved running British athletics, given that so many of the athletes are black. But diversity only works if you appoint the right people. And I think most people in the sport feel that neither Sarah nor Kristen were actually the right people for the jobs they were given. So again, I mean, the way that she leaves the sport is we've had less events. We had no Diamond League in 2020. Now, other people managed to run Diamond League, but we didn't. We had no Diamond League in London this year. We've got no TV contract in place. And she kept talking about athlete first, but nobody quite sees what that means. Very good person, very capable, did some excellent things in protection and perhaps some reorganizing, but just somehow lost the confidence of the constituency, I would say.
How do you assess Sarah Simmington?
Well, it's hard to be objective about her because I think she behaved despicably in the last week. You know, to go to do a press briefing on a Monday, to do a board meeting on a Wednesday, talking about what she was going to do in the next 2 years when she had already decided to leave. And then that somebody described that as probably the most crass and inappropriate tweet ever. I couldn't be happier. I think she never really understood the sport. She was involved in the appointment of Christian Malcolm as head coach. Now, Christian is a lovely man, and he's great fun, but I just think he did not have the experience to do the job. And it was said at the beginning that he's the head coach, but he's never actually coached an individual athlete. And again, most people thought that was something that really was missing. How can you help other coaches to coach if you've never coached yourself? And when Christian and Sarah brought in Darren Campbell as head of sprints and relays and Tim Benjamin as head of long sprints and relays, neither of them had a current coaching license. Neither of them had a license in one case for 8 years and another for 15 years. So, you know, you think of all the coaches who are working day in, day out, and rather than them, you just choose two people who it so happened, had been people that Christian had competed with. So, you know, that didn't go down very well. And then, you know, we've talked a bit about the information that came out that Scott Simpson was having his hours cut from 5 days to 3 days, and that Andy Young was suffering something similar. Well, at the Monday briefing, Sarah said that Scott had been confirmed as working full time, and they were still working through. I mean, Andy has actually never been employed by British Athletics, but has a consultancy contract. But that they were still working through those. But you know, if you're going to keep Scott full time, why and how was it leaked that he had been cut to three days? I mean, it's just embarrassingly inept.
Yeah, Yep. There was how did you compare? Did you like Van Comeny when he was doing the stuff with British Athletics? Or is that
I didn't
nice of a word?
know him personally. I mean, he was a character because could be very amusing in his interactions with the press. There were occasions when he would have conversations with athletes in public that he'd been better to have in private. Like when in 2010 at the European Athletics Championships, our sprint relay team performed badly. He gave them a telling off in public. I think there are better ways to act with that. Again, I've heard stories of athletes he coached being in tears because of how aggressive and critical he was with them. But equally, a lot of people respected him for what he did.
Talk to me about the WCP right now. With all the anger over that list, and to tell our Americans, because of the British lottery, there's 67 athletes that were named at different levels, including a relay squad. And what was curious to me is you guys have done so well with relays, yet this time they named no one to the men. And then Sarah Simmington, and I hate to use the vernacular, totally bullshitted in that press conference about, well, yeah, we've got all these things to cover people, and it really wasn't. And so I was just curious about how you felt about that.
I mean, that did seem an incredible end of an era because we've got so many medals in that. But I mean, to be fair, at the moment, perhaps we don't have the runners to be competing for medals. But what the strategy is to get that developed, I don't know. But I mean, I think that the one athlete that he was quoted, that he was questioned about, was Andrew Butchert. And again, I mean, I wrote it in a piece that to quote the Shakespeare quote that the lady doth protest too much. I mean, she described Andrew Butchert as a fantastic athlete, but yet a fantastic athlete who isn't worthy of being funded. And I mean, Tom Bosworth has been taken off funding, and Tom may appeal on that. I mean, I just thought that Tom has overachieved every year, struggled with injuries this year, and that perhaps wasn't taken into consideration. But if the person who was most responsible for putting that list together has now gone, I think it leaves British athletics in a difficult position in terms of dealing with appeals.
I can tell you a story now that I was unable to tell a while back. You know that Harry Mera was the coach of Ashton and Briani, one of the finest coaches in the world. I've known him for almost 40 years. And Vin Lanana, when he was the head coach at Oregon, handpicked Harry to come up and coach the Eatons. At the time, it was, Brianna Thiessen. And when Ashton retired, Harry had coached in a lot of places, but he needed to still make a living. And he, a year ago, applied for a position at British Athletics. He was asked to apply. He applied. Nike supported him. There were letters called in. Coaches around the world called. Athletes called. He got a couple farm notes that said he was being considered. And this is, again, one of the finest coaches in the world. And a lot of the British coaches actually rely on him to help him with stuff. And he and I had a conversation, and he had come up with a way to redo one of the coaching things for young coaches, to do digital things that would so encourage these young coaches to increase their skills, because Harry knows everything. I mean, he's one of the best, and the guy can talk for hours. And I thought he was a shoo-in. And he didn't even make it to they didn't include him in the final interviews. And he got a form note, and the person they brought in had nothing to do with track and field. And I, my big beefs with British athletics was when Neil DeVos, it goes back 10 years ago when they let fast track go and they started losing sponsorships, and they did it so they could save 15%. This World Cup thing, where I have been told that there was about $1.5 million in extra travel, and they really hurt themselves financially. And then for some reason, and we've seen it in the U.S. too, because USA Track and Field, after Craig Masbach left to go to Nike, USA Track and Field brought in a guy named Doug Logan. And Doug had been in soccer. He was a running guy, but he got along terribly with the board, and they ousted him. And then there was members of the board who wanted to be CEO. And then they brought in Max Siegel. And I know for a fact that sponsors, that major positions with sponsors really like Max. And he's raised money. He doesn't talk much. People don't know if he likes track and field or likes NASCAR. He was in NASCAR. I think he keeps things close to his vest, but they don't even have. The difference is there's money and they're performing. Once the performances go down, then all hell will break loose. The other issue in the U.S. is we've got a World Championships coming up in less than a year, and no one knows what's going on. And the people at World Champs 2022 Eugene keep it very close to their vest. I've talked to media all over the world, including the top people in the U.S. in sports, and they get nothing. There's very little information. The only thing we've gotten is that World Athletics went out to Eugene and said, wow, this is a bitch in sight, and yeah, we'll have a great World Champs. Well, I'm happy for them. What about the hotels that are needed? How are they going to get most of the people from Portland to Eugene by bus? What are they going to do in Portland to keep things going? So none of those things are answered. And utilizing media and the way that I feel media is being treated is that media is the enemy in almost all the cases right now. It was very interesting to me how your press release came out and what time your press release came out, because back in the Olin Cassell days with USA Track and Field, I used to wait in my office till Fridays at 7 o'clock Eastern time, because that's when all the drug positives would be announced or anything that was scurrilous or wrong in the sport. They wouldn't do it while the stock market was trading. They wouldn't do it while anybody was in their offices. And so Friday nights, I'd work till about 7 and then I'd walk home. And sure enough, about 7 o'clock, I would get a fax that was a little interesting, and it's British athletics is one of the big stories in our sport. And your success, and you put it up there, the top 5, USA Track and Field coming around, British athletics, the Chinese in the technical events, European athletics resurrection. There's 4 of the top stories in our sport over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And right now, you guys have had so many good things going on. And, I read that list and I'm kind of going, yeah, Andy Butchart wasn't on there, Tom Bosworth. The whole thing with the men's 4x4 totally floors me. And she just didn't know what the hell she was talking about.
The advantage at the moment is the next 6 months, Mark Munro, who was the head of Scottish and has been the development director at British Athletics, is in charge, working alongside Ian Beattie, who used to be the chairman of Scottish. So you get 2 people from the sport at the helm. So that sort of gives me confidence. I don't know others personally, but everyone I ask about them is very positive. Whether there's a hope that Mark Munro can grow into the job, I don't know. I would be pretty sure that the next CEO will be from the sport uh, because of the bad experience we've had this time. And certainly the performance director will be from the sport.
Are those the lessons you think we're learning from the Coates Simmington appointments?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, funny, I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to think that could it have been predicted? I mean, you see, I think that Joe Coates was very capable lady. In a way, I mean, I would say I liked her from my interactions. I mean, I had her phone number. She was accessible. If I contacted her, she got back to me. That was all good. I think if she had come in perhaps with a little bit more humility, if that's the right word, and said, golly, I don't know the sport. Somebody like Cherry Alexander will be indispensable to me. Somebody who can explain to me things that I might not instantly see. But rather than that, Cherry and several others like her were just dispensed with. And suddenly her right hand person is another person not from the sport, but who had worked with her at netball. And I think that is a great point that Kath Mary makes, that the complexity of our sport and the range, and that I mean, what has a marathon runner and a sprinter and a road runner, a cross country runner? I mean, that it's certainly not a one size fits all approach that you can have. So I think that Joe Coates could have been a good CEO, but if she had listened more and not perhaps rushed in to make great changes. But again, to be fair, I don't know what financial constraints she has been under in terms of. I mean, certainly the pandemic has hit the finances, which she was just starting when the pandemic started. But I don't know. I think that it could have been done better. And similarly, there were a lot more experienced people who could have been the head coach. But again, a cynical person would say, you appoint somebody with limited experience and they will not pose a threat to the CEO.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, having observed federations for a while and corporations for a while, so many people make the mistake of bringing in their own people, not recognizing that something's working well, and by changing it, you're going to hurt the performance of the company. And it's a very astute management who gets that if it's not broken, don't fix it. And that, and listening to someone who's been there for a while. I recall a story of there was a publisher at World, Mike Perlis, and he subsequently published some really the top magazines, including Forbes. And when he was at Runner's World, he went and he met people at all the different departments. And while he knew a little bit about running, he surrounded himself with people who knew the sport so he could make better decisions. And the decisions were still his at the end.
Yeah.
But he had good knowledge and he had people who bought into what he was doing, and he respected people and allowed them some autonomy. And I thought you provided some very thoughtful interviews and comments with Joe Coates over the 18 months. And I thought she would have been much more of a listener. And she obviously wasn't. Or if she listened, she just turned it off, because to not understand and not appreciate the complexity of track and field was mistake one. To the comment that Sarah Simmington made in that presser, one of the last pressers, where she talked about how, where she made it clear that she didn't like being second guessed, and told me that she had a thin skin, and so she really didn't have the ability to do what she was doing. And going from cycling to track and field, she went from a small fire to a conflagration, because you want to annoy the British media, you take a few of their medals away. It's I remember the story when was it Gary Loff took coached Mo Farah, and one of my friends at one of the major British papers said, Gary's a fine coach, and if Mo, he's an even finer coach. But if Mo doesn't equal what he's done or doesn't do well, he's a terrible coach. It was really interesting to me to see that. And, you had in 2019, no Mo running for medals. You had in 2021, no Mo running for medals. If he had been in his old 17 or 15 shape, he'd have probably medaled, and that would have been one or two more medals for you guys. Totally. Everybody would have been going, oh, great. Yeah. So talk to me about Mark Monroe. What do you know about him?
Very little, really. I mean, he was the CEO of Scottish Athletics and was very well respected for that. Obviously, Scottish Athletics is a much smaller operation than British, but equally, while he was at CEO, we saw Elise McColgan, Laura Muir, Chris O'Hare, Jake Whiteman, Josh Kerr, Jim Ariki, etc. emerge. So the Scottish, you can't say that the Scottish setup wasn't good. I mean, again, you can always question how much the federation contributes to things, but I think he did a good job. Then he came to be development director at British Athletics, and somebody said to me who knows him that 5 years from now, if nothing had happened that's happened in the last week, my informant said 5 years from now, I would think that Mark would be a very serious candidate to be CEO. Whether he's got the experience to take it on now is a question. Whether he can move up from being CEO of a much smaller organization to take on all of British athletics. My source who knows him said that would be a question.
In your experience, is there competition between English athletics, British athletics, and Scottish athletics?
I have never totally understood those relationships, and who's responsible for what. Because the funding for athletes comes through British athletics, and next year we have this strange situation where we have 3 championships. But for someone like Laura Muir, she would compete for Britain in the world and the Europeans, but in the Commonwealth, she would compete for Scotland. So it is odd. And I mean, another question that you could say is, if British athletics ceased to exist, would a Dina Asher-Smith or a Laura Muir be any less effective? You know, how given that they have their own coaching set up, they have their own sponsorship income set up, and how much is the federation responsible for the success of an athlete? I think it's a great question. I mean, clearly, what the funding of the 67 does is people starting out have a chance to stay full time, which they wouldn't have without that. But then, the interesting thing, there's a contrary view on this, is that if you give a 19-year-old 30 to 40,000, it's possible for them to think, I have arrived, and perhaps to lose the hunger. And somebody I know well, who's been one of our most successful athletes in the days before funding, would say that when he was beginning to compete internationally, he was a full-time student, was doing a job some evenings to earn a little bit of money, and was fitting training in around this. And that perhaps there was a determination was developed in overcoming that adversity, compared to now somebody who runs a half decent time at the age of 19 and is suddenly put on funding so that they can, if they choose, be a full-time athlete.
Yeah. No, I think there's so many good things that British athletics does. I think that, like you have said, that we've taken this full episode, Athletics Chat 73, and really talked about the crisis last week. But I also think there's a confidence in that I am hearing in you that things can get better, and I think it'll be something that we'll check in on next week. But Stuart, thank you again. This was Athletics Chat 73. Stuart Weir in the intellectual capital of the world, Oxford, England. Larry Eder in San Jose, California. We solve all the world's problems in athletics. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks to Mike Deering for managing both of us. He's our production manager in Indianapolis, Indiana. And thank you for watching Athletics Chat 73. Stay safe. Well, hello, sports fans. Larry Eder, RunBlogRun. Stuart Weir was with us. He's in Oxford, England, the intellectual capital of the world. And we remind John Ridgen of that every week, just so you know. And this is Athletics Chat 73, the epilogue. Our Larry's monologue, as Mike calls it, another convo with Larry. It's where I talk into the mirror and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? But today we're talking about the challenges of British athletics. At the end of last week, Joe Coates, CEO, 18 months, and Sarah Simmington, the director of performance, both with no experience in track and field, have resigned. During their tenure, there were some things that Stuart thought that Joe did fairly well. There was some massive screw-ups by Ms. Simmington. And it wasn't that her heart wasn't in the right place. We obviously don't know where her heart is, but what was strange was that not only did she seem to have no knowledge of track and field, but we're not sure who she used for advice. And when she resigned, within a very short period of time, I believe someone told me 15 minutes, another one person told me an hour, there was a tweet that said she'd taken a job at British Cycling and she couldn't be happier. Yet several days beforehand, she had not included stalwarts like Andy Butchert, Tom Bosworth, the men's 4x4 in the WCP program. And a couple media pundits referred to Sarah Symington's "couldn't be happier" is the most inappropriate tweet of all times. I'm not sure it's the most inappropriate, but I would put it in my top 5. And I will, maybe that's one of the things we can do is for a little award at the end of the year, Joe Coates over the last 18 months provided some thoughtful leadership in terms of protecting athletes and setting up some various structures, but she also let go or didn't support a whole cadre of fine British coaches, technical people, and probably the one I really don't think she ever recovered from is letting Cherry Alexander go. It was a total screw up. There was no one there to run the meets. And during their tenure, number of BBC shows dropped, the number of meets in the UK dropped, and they didn't do a Diamond League meet, which was insane. The UK is one of the birthplaces of track and field. And if it doesn't have a Diamond League meet, or when Pascoe and Ridgeon and Stewart were there, they had 2, and they had the meets indoors, and I flew over every season to see all of them because I wanted to see how great meets were done. And without Cherry and the team there, that was just rubbish. Sarah Symington, again, she was the director of performance. I'm not sure she knew the athletes or the coaches well enough to do that. Is the world-class program the right way to fund? I think it's a great way to fund. It's different than what the U.S. does. We rely more on individual sponsorships, and then there's obviously help that USATF does for athletes. But the difference between USATF and British athletics is this. Max Siegel has the support of leadership at all the sponsors. He's done his homework. USA is winning medals and is either 1 or 2 in the Olympic medal food chain, and that makes the US OPC very happy. And there's a lot of money there. And I believe Max and the team in Indy feel that a lot of times no news is good news. And I can understand that because when you don't say anything, you don't get in trouble. But we've got a World Championships coming up. We've got a US Championships coming up. And this is the first Worlds in the US. And your biggest sponsor, Nike, is putting gazillions into it. So someone needs to manage it and run it. And it'd be really nice if we got a little news every week on what's going on. But I've digressed. But the difference between USA Track and Field and British athletics is USA Track and Field is bringing in medals, bringing in money, and keeping their mouth shut, which is what a lot of corporate America sees. I kind of disagree with that. British athletics is losing money, losing events, losing some of their coaches, and pissing off the people that they claim that they're there to support. Mark Monroe coming in from Scottish Athletics. Mark has a great reputation. Laura Muir, who I think is a very straight shooter, wrote a very kind social media post about Mark and her confidence. And another pundit told Stuart Weir that he believes that within 4 to 5 years, Mark could be the next CEO of British Athletics. And we'll have to see. I think that could be very, very cool. You need someone in there who knows how to run the show and knows how to run corporately. Obviously, Ian Beattie, the CEO of UK Athletics, a man who has run a financial or a legal business with billings, we understand, of about 30 million. So he does know how to run a business. He's a runner. He's put on races. He's competed in races, so he gets it. His first board meeting, and after that, Coates and Symington resigned. Well, a lot of times 2 + 2 is 4. And in corporate dealings, and I've dealt with that for most of my adult life, when a change happens that quick, someone is back there pulling the marionette strings. And I congratulate Mr. Beattie on coming in, finding the problem or what he assesses a problem, and clearing it out. There'll be some short time pain, but it's good for the athletes and good for the sport and good for British athletics. Beattie and Mark Monroe, I think, could be very interesting. We'll be observing it. And this is Larry Eder with RunBlogRun. This is the epilogue of Athletics Chat 73, where we talked about British athletics imploding. Thank you.